called black everything. Everything black, culture over everything, y'all. We taking it back, black.
Welcome to Left to Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. We're joined today by Dasan Ahanu, spoken word poet, assistant professor at State Augustine's University, and part of the 2015 class of the Nasir Jones Fellows at the Hip Hop Institute and Archive at Harvard University. How you doing, Dasan?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing, Mark?
First of all, congratulations on becoming a Nasir Jones Fellow.
Thank you.
Talk a little bit about what it was like when you found out.
It was surreal. I didn't know when to expect to get the word. When I got the email, I sort of danced. First I hadn't opened it yet, and then I read it, and then I danced again, and then. And so it was just trying to figure out, who do I tell first? But it's just a beautiful thing to in that moment, to be a hip hop head and someone who grew up with the culture, to be able to read a letter from Skip Gates that says that you've been appointed a Nasir Jones Fellow. Like, this is
And for those in the audience who don't know, the Nasir Jones Fellowship was endowed a few years ago up at Harvard, at the Hip Hop Archive Institute, and Institute, which is under the leadership of Professor Marcelina Morgan. This past year, they had fellows like our good friend Murray Foreman and Dasan as part of a class that also will include Professor Regina Bradley and also Professor Bettina Love. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about your own work in the context of this, right? Mm-hmm. Because when folks know Dasan, particularly here locally in the dorm area, oh, he's a spoken word cat, mm-hmm. right? And I think for most audiences, they assume there's a more direct correlation between spoken word poetry mm-hmm. and hip hop. Mm-hmm. But folks who are really doing spoken word will say, well, it's not quite, right? Mm-hmm. We're more drawn from a literary tradition, mm-hmm. and hip hop is this other thing. But how would you describe it in the context of your work?
Well, it's a combination of that literary tradition and the art of emceeing. Which is distinctly hip hop. And I think that for me, like many spoken word artists who did grow up as hip hop heads, it's how we kind of carved our own way through this spoken word, is to take what we see in emceeing and some of the techniques and elements of lyricism and combining that with the poetry that we write.
Folks will look at something like Def Poetry Jam, it was incredibly popular for a period of time. And we know that it helped the careers of a great many people, particularly if they had an agent. Mm-hmm. But I imagine that Def Poetry Jam was both a blessing and a curse.
Yes. Right,
because in some ways it was not really reflective mm-hmm. of what the spoken word scene might have been on the ground, particularly in a place like Durham.
Yes, and that's one of the challenges. Because of when it came out, there was a body of established poets who had already been working, who needed to be shown first. But those reflected particular large markets like San Francisco, LA, the Bay, New York. But the South has a whole different kind of distinct approach to spoken word, and it's rooted in much of the Southern traditions of storytelling and blues, and rhythmic, very vivid and full of imagery and language and colloquialisms, and just there's a whole lot more to it. And outside of Atlanta, we never really got to see much of that with Def Poetry Jam.
How has it traveled outside of the South? I mean, we could have the same conversation about what happens to Southern hip hop when it leaves the South. Mm-hmm. But how do audience react when you're, say, up in New York or someplace out of the South, doing your work?
It's sort of a mix of sort of appreciation and sort of kind of like surprise, because I think that, especially with spoken word, because I think that there's an expectation that we would be able to do well with the performative aspect. But sometimes I find that folks are surprised by the writing and the depth of the writing and the really attention to craft on the writing side. But as Southerners, we kind of expect that, so we kind of have gotten to the point where we take pride and focusing on that side so that we can kind of dispel some of those notions.
You're watching Left to Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. We're joined today in the John Hope Franklin Center here in the Left to Black studios with Dasan Ahanu, spoken word poet, assistant professor at St. Augustine's University, and of course part of the 2015 class of the Nasir Jones Fellows at Harvard University. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes that when folks think about spoken word, because you mentioned the writing, right, mm-hmm. the craft of it, you know, we can all think about a movie. Mm-hmm. Right, one particular famous movie with Lorenz Tate set in Chicago, and folks begin to think of spoken word as just like off the dome, effective, right? that really betrays the labor mm-hmm. behind the work that you do. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about your process.
Well, my process is sort of a reflection of life, and it's just a result of my inspirations. You know, being a Southern poet who is, you know, surrounded by lots of like big life, trying to reflect that, you know, takes a lot of time and attention to reflect it the right way. And so, you know, I try to think about all the ways that I can convey the things that I see and experience and have grown up around. And then, you know, there's a bit of rhythm because I want it to be felt. There's a mix of language because I want it to be accessible. And then just trying to figure out how to put that extra kind of sting and punch in it so it hits. You know, so I listen, generally I sit and listen to music. I try to listen to music with no words. You know, and that's where I kind of, you know, have gotten over the years to be better informed about jazz and blues music. I love instrumentalists. And that's sort of my process, just to kind of cut out the background and sit and just translate the pictures in my mind onto the page.
I think about the Blackhearts Generation, mm-hmm. you know, the Baracas, the Sonia Sanchez, Nikki Giovanni. Mm-hmm. Great documentary of Sonia Sanchez. Mm-hmm. It's going to be released this summer. Folks like Hakeem Mahmoudi. You know, there was a generation that came after them mm-hmm. That read all the work and kind of reproduced their aesthetic. Do you have any concerns that, you know, there's a generation coming behind you that's going to maintain, right, mm-hmm. the energy of spoken word?
I do. I have a concern, but it's not about the maintenance. I'm waiting to see if someone at some point in time is going to see a way to actually make it a commodity. I'm more concerned of that because the young kids are just running with it, and they have access to us thanks to YouTube and things like that. They're seeing what we're doing, and they are approaching it in a way that's really unique because they start off talking about the world, and we have to help them talk about themselves. So I think that's going to continue. There's the danger of rock stardom.
Think about someone like Joshua Bennett, right? You know, what does it mean, right, to be at the White House? You know, 5 years ago, you got YouTube clips, and mm-hmm. folks like, wow, that's hot. And mm-hmm. 3 years later, right. you know, you're at the White House. Right. Or when HBO showed up at Brave New Voices, right. and everybody who was on those seasons, you know, instantly was just all this extra attention that many of us older poets didn't find until later. And so you have that, and that's my concern more so than anything. Like, what does that do to where they are with the art? How do you think the older guard felt when you think about folks like Felipe Luciano, Baraka, and I mention those two specifically because I remember their appearances mm-hmm. on Def Poetry Jam, and some of these young cats, you know, who aren't young now, mm-hmm. you know, your generation, mm-hmm. you know, the ones who were made mm-hmm. at the time, you know, they were probably making more money on the spoken word circuit, you mm-hmm. know, hitting colleges than the Baracas and the Sonia Sanchez and those folks ever made mm-hmm. from their poetry. Mm-hmm. Did you find that their energy was more to respect how the game had changed? Or were they a little salty?
Well, you know, I think it's I wouldn't say salty, but more so of the same kind of concern that I had, which was the way that it was expressed. It's like, you have opportunities we didn't have, but don't forget to respect what this is really about. And also don't be fooled, you know, by the attention and the places that you're being asked to come into. Don't lose your sense of what's really going on and why you have this access. I feel like the times that I've been in some of the places and got to hear them talk, that's what it was about. It was about don't let this pull the wool over your eyes. Yeah. And it's hard.
When I look at the 2015 class of the Nasir Jones Fellows, again, yourself, Southern poet as you just described yourself, Regina Bradley, who's really trying to kind of change the game in terms of how we think about Black Southern literary / hip hop studies, right? And then of course Bettina Love, who's teaching at the University of Georgia, and at least in terms of the work that she's done around Black girls in schooling in hip hop, it's all Southern culture, even though she's from upstate New York. What does it say about where Black Southern culture is, not even just Southern hip hop, that the three of you are from doing work clearly in the South that's now being represented in some place like Harvard?
I think it's amazing, and we had a brief moment to kind of, all together kind of on social media just stop and say that this is just a unique moment. And I think it's a testament to the way that Southern culture has shaped hip hop over the last few years. And I think that we have an opportunity to add to that conversation, to broaden that conversation in a way that I think is really good. And part of it is, in the South, we've had a chip on our shoulder for a long time. And I think that the opportunities like this allow us to kind of resolve that chip a little bit. But we've had it, and it's not going away anytime soon. But I think that, the more that we can lift our voices and kind of really examine what goes on in the South in terms of hip hop, then I think it makes it a little bit better.
Do you think you have to give up your Southernness to do that, right? And I don't necessarily mean that intentionally, that, you try to be less Southern. But when I think about, someone like Rhapsody, and particularly, her star turn on Kendrick's To Pimp a Butterfly, no one's thinking about Rhapsody as a Southern rapper, right? This is a Black woman from North Carolina, Snow Hill, North Carolina, right? She is as Southern as they come, right? She represents the South as she does, but I don't think anybody thinks about her as a Southern rapper. And while that might not be intentional on her part, do you think that's part of the trade-off, that the larger country is not interested in the Southernness of the Southern poet?
Well, I think that's part of why I think it's really good for us to all be going to do this fellowship, because I think that happens, and I've had that happen too when I've gone to perform places. Nobody, things get noted that I've been hearing all my life, the intelligence of my poetry, the lack of an accent, these things that are like, what are you really trying to say? But I think that to be able to then contextualize and say that this is also a part of Southern hip hop, and that if you really look at the things that she's saying and the way that she's saying them, they are distinctly Southern. She's just been able to do that in a way that everybody can respect and appreciate. And so we've got to, bring attention to the continuum of the type of artists that are down here, and let people know that there's a broad range and it's diverse, and it's, like, just eat a meal with us for a second and just see what we have to offer.
I like that. We're going to ask you to drop some bars in a moment.
Okay.
But I've been asking so many people this question, this season. Tower Records used to do this thing called Desert Island Disc, right? The 10 songs, 10 albums, and if you were stuck on a desert island, you would have to have these 10. I'm not going to ask you 10, 5.
Okay.
Your 5 artists that if you were stuck on this desert island, you would have to have these 5 artists
okay.
with you.
Right.
And let's not even just say just hip hop, like just expand it.
Okay. I'd have to have Nina Simone. I would have to have Tribe Called Quest. I would want. I would probably go with Coltrane, and then. Last 2 picks are going to be a little unconventional. I'll have to go with Sean Price.
Talk about that choice.
Because I need, you want some grittiness. There's a line between finesse and ratchet, and there's that hip hop grit that you get from Sean P. And sometimes you're just in the mood from that. Yeah. Music is mood, so like all my choices are the moods that I know I'm going to go through as I'm stuck on this desert island. And then the last one that I never get tired of listening to, I'm gonna have to take some Jay. Take some Jay-Z with me. Yeah.
What is it about, because, he's the cat that people love to hate in some ways. I mean, he's problematic in all kinds of ways, personally, his politics and what have you. But what is it about his art that even when the art may fail on occasion, right, you trust him?
He's one of the most aware artists that I've seen in a long time, at least in my time. Everything that he does shows a marvelous sense of awareness of what's going on around him, and I think that's why even when it doesn't quite work, it works in a way, because there's at least a smile, like, okay, I see what you tried to do. Yeah, okay, all right, that was cute. I'm not really feeling it, but I get it. And so that's always been something that's amazed me. Like, I find myself now listening and then comparing what he was doing with the time period. And I discovered, wow, I see what is there that I wasn't listening for when I first heard it.
That's interesting. We're here with Dasan Ahanu, a spoken word poet and assistant professor at St. Augustine's University, part of the 2015 class of the Nasir Jones Fellows at the Hip Hop Archive and Institute at Harvard University. You gonna drop some bars for us?
Sure. This particular piece is called The Artist, and it's inspired by 9th Street here in Durham, North Carolina, and a particular street artist who I see all the time. There's an old man wearing a Technicolor dream coat sitting at a street corner named Desire on a bench outside of an old laundromat. He has a cardboard sign that reads "Before and After" is playing a banjo covered in superhero band-aids. His once full head of hair is now broken homes and bulimia, tattered rainforest down his cheek, eyes Caribbean blue, skin commercial beach. You would think him all of society's transgressions until you see him smile, all Sunday choir robe clean. He speaks in staccato. His lips are the Nicholas brothers. The words he offers are stormy weather dance scenes, spoken in syncopation to the fleeting optimism in his spirit. I want to give him a couple dollars. He wants to give me a couple pieces of advice. I say it's a fair trade. I've bartered my time for worse. I expect a story. What I get is a revelation. He asks me what I do. I say that I'm a poet, and he laughs. And then he rises from that bench like Suleiman, rising from the throne of a collapsing empire in Constantinople, and places Marion Barry and Clarence Thomas in front of me. His knees are shaky. He reaches into his coat pocket, pulls out a plastic flower, and hands it to me. We say we want our roses while we can still smell them, but if they're fake, it's sort of like intention with no fruition, like dreams with no ambition. What good is appreciation if it's not real? But then again, sitcoms have laugh tracks. After enough episodes, do you wonder if you're really funny, or do you become content with knowing that there will always be laughter? His hands dance. Fingers like the Temptations and the Spinners. I noticed David Ruffin had trouble keeping up the steps. His left forefinger had been broken before, probably from holding the truth, the ability to point out other people's mistakes. He reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out an old watch, 14 karat, covered in forgotten currency, sunburnt, with a broken jaw and arms stuck in an empty embrace. So we've all had our face cracked, felt ashamed, embarrassed, had our reputation tarnished by bad decisions, been stuck in a moment, unable to recognize that times have changed, but we're all made of valuable material, and 2 times a day we are perfect, so there is always hope. So now I'm standing there, holding a false promise and a lost opportunity, with a look on my face as blank as Herman Cain's NAACP application. And I'm looking at an old man laughing like juke joint scamps playing a jug band rendition of ragtime in his belly. I'm so confused, yet I'm so aware. I give them back, but I couldn't. He knows that there are no refunds, no exchanges. These symbols have already begun to be used. This composition has already begun to be written. See, he taught me about judgment, about finding blessings where you least expect to find them, about recognizing that wisdom comes sometimes when everything crumbles around you. So in honor of this ill-gotten ghostwriter, whenever I deliver this poem, I make sure that everyone knows who actually wrote it.
I want to thank Dasan Ahanu for joining us here in the Left the Black studios today. Thank you, man.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts, and every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot. All black everything, everything black, culture over everything.